"You don't belong here," she said, and the room went still in a way that felt colder than silence itself. Olivia Carter didn't fall right away. There was a split second where her body tried to hold its ground, where instinct fought gravity, where her hand moved, almost protectively, toward the gentle curve of her 7-month belly, as if that small life inside her mattered more than balance, more than dignity, more than anything else in that vast marble foyer stretching nearly 30 feet high with glass walls reflecting the late afternoon light like a polished mirror. Then her heels slipped against the smooth floor, and she lowered down, not violently, not dramatically, just enough to change the atmosphere in the room, just enough for every conversation to die mid-breath. No one rushed forward. Not the staff lined along the walls in tailored uniforms. Not the guests who had been sipping champagne moments earlier. And not Ethan Blake, the man standing 10 feet away in a perfectly cut navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his expression unreadable, his posture unchanged, as if nothing irreversible had just happened in front of him. Vanessa Cole exhaled sharply, brushing an invisible speck from her sleeve, her heels clicking once against the floor as she stepped closer, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through whatever remained of the moment. "I told you," she added, almost casually. "This isn't your place anymore." Olivia didn't look at her. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze stayed downward, not out of submission, but focus, steady, deliberate, controlled, as she drew in a slow breath, the kind that fills your lungs just enough to keep you standing when everything inside wants to collapse. Her fingers tightened slightly against the fabric of her dress, the soft material wrinkling under the pressure, and for a brief second, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the central air system overhead and the distant ticking of a wall clock somewhere beyond the hallway. Ethan shifted his weight, barely noticeable, but enough to signal awareness. Still, he said nothing. No command, no concern, no correction, and that silence, more than anything, settled heavily across the space, thick and unmoving, like a verdict no one had spoken out loud, yet everyone understood. Olivia finally lifted her head, not high, not defiant, just enough to reorient herself to the world around her, to the people who had chosen to watch instead of act, to the man who had once promised her everything and now stood as still as the glass walls behind him. Her voice, when it came, was soft, steady, almost too calm for the moment it lived in. "I'm still his wife," she said, not to argue, not to beg, but simply to state a truth that seemed to echo differently now in a room that no longer recognized it. Vanessa let out a short laugh under her breath, the kind meant to diminish rather than entertain, and turned slightly toward Ethan as if expecting confirmation, approval, anything. But Ethan didn't move. He didn't nod. He didn't deny it either. He just stood there, caught between acknowledgement and avoidance, and that hesitation, small as it was, shifted something invisible in the air. Outside, beyond the towering glass panels, the sky had begun to darken, clouds rolling in slowly, quietly, like something approaching long before anyone realized it was already there. Olivia remained where she was for a moment longer, not because she could not stand, but because she understood something no one else in that room seemed to recognize yet, that once she rose, nothing would ever return to what it had been even an hour ago, even a minute ago, and that the version of her that had walked into that house earlier that day, hopeful, patient, still believing in promises that had begun to feel distant but not entirely broken, would not be the same woman who walked out. She pressed her palm gently against her abdomen again, feeling the faint, steady presence beneath her skin, grounding herself in something real, something that had not changed, something that did not depend on anyone else's choices or silence. And then she inhaled slowly and pushed herself up with controlled effort, careful, deliberate. Her movements measured in a way that made the room watch her even more closely than when she had lowered to the floor. A house staff member shifted subtly along the wall, as if debating whether to step forward, but stopped short when Vanessa's gaze flicked in their direction, sharp and warning without a single word needing to be spoken. Olivia noticed that too, not directly, but in the way the air tightened again, in the way assistance was withheld before it could even begin, and she accepted it without reaction, smoothing the front of her dress with a small motion that carried more dignity than anyone in that room deserved to witness. The marble beneath her feet felt colder now. Or maybe she was simply more aware of it, of everything, of the echo of each subtle sound, of the faint clink of glass as someone set down a champagne flute they no longer felt comfortable holding, of the distant rumble of thunder beginning to roll somewhere far beyond the estate grounds. Ethan finally moved, one step forward, then another, slow enough that it seemed almost reluctant, his hands slipping into his pockets as though that gesture alone could shield him from the weight of what was unfolding. His voice, when it came, quieter than expected, controlled, but carrying an edge of finality that had not been there before. "Olivia, you should go upstairs and rest," he said, not looking directly at her at first, his gaze settling somewhere just past her shoulder, as if addressing the space around her rather than the woman herself. Olivia tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition, because she understood what he was doing, understood that this was not concern but avoidance, not protection but dismissal wrapped carefully in softer language. And for a brief second, something flickered across her expression, not anger, not even hurt, but clarity, the kind that arrives quietly and settles deeply. "I am fine," she replied, her tone even, unshaken, and that answer seemed to land harder than anything louder could have, because it removed the last excuse from the room, the last illusion that this moment could be redirected into something less honest. Vanessa crossed her arms, shifting her weight onto one hip, the faintest smirk returning as she studied Olivia like a problem that should have already been solved. "You are still here," she said, her voice laced with disbelief more than frustration now, as if Olivia's composure itself was an inconvenience she had not anticipated. Olivia finally looked at her then, fully, her eyes steady, unhurried, not searching for approval or permission, simply acknowledging presence. And there was something in that look, something quiet and unwavering, that made Vanessa's expression tighten for just a fraction of a second before she recovered it. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap softly against the glass, faint at first, then more consistent, creating a rhythm that filled the spaces between words, and with it came a subtle shift in the light, the bright reflections on the marble floor dimming into something softer, more diffused, as if the world beyond the walls had decided to change tone along with the moment inside. Olivia turned slightly, her posture straight, her movements unhurried, and took a single step toward the entrance, not rushed, not forced, but chosen, each step measured as if she were walking not away from something, but towards something unseen, something waiting just beyond the edge of what anyone in that room could currently understand. And as she moved, the distance between her and Ethan widened in a way that felt larger than the physical space itself, a quiet separation forming that no words could bridge, no apology could easily close, and no silence could hide anymore. The distance between Olivia and the doorway shortened with each quiet step, yet the weight in the room seemed to grow heavier, as if something unseen was stretching between her and everything she was leaving behind, something that could not be repaired by explanation or softened by time. And still she did not rush, did not look back, because she had already understood that whatever answers she might have once waited for were no longer coming. The soft rhythm of rain against the glass walls intensified, each drop tracing slow lines downward like a silent countdown, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled again, deeper now, closer, echoing through the high ceilings in a way that made even the staff shift slightly in place. Behind her, Vanessa exhaled sharply, the faint click of her heel against the marble floor breaking the stillness as she turned toward Ethan with a look that carried both irritation and expectation. "You are just going to let her walk out like that?" she asked, her voice lower now, edged with something less controlled, less certain, as if the outcome she had imagined was not unfolding the way she had planned. Ethan did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on Olivia's back, on the slow, unwavering way she moved, and for the first time there was something unsettled in his posture, a hesitation that did not belong to the man who had built an empire on decisive action, his jaw tightening slightly, as if he were weighing something he could not fully name. Olivia reached the edge of the foyer where the polished marble met the darker stone of the entrance corridor, and the subtle change beneath her feet grounded her further, reminding her that every space had a threshold, every moment a line that once crossed could not be reversed, and she paused there, not out of uncertainty, but acknowledgement, her hand resting once more over her abdomen in a quiet, instinctive gesture that carried more meaning than any words spoken in that house. A faint memory surfaced, uninvited but clear, of a smaller home, of laughter that had not needed permission, of voices that had never required careful tone or measured distance. And it passed through her not as regret, but as contrast, a reminder of what had been. Real before this had become something else entirely. Olivia. Ethan's voice came again, firmer this time, but still restrained, as if he were trying to reclaim authority over a moment that had already slipped beyond his control. And that single word hung in the air, suspended, waiting for a response that did not come. She did not turn around, did not slow, and that absence of reaction seemed to unsettle him more than any confrontation would have, because it removed him from the center of her decisions in a way he was not accustomed to. Vanessa watched closely, her expression tightening again, the faint confidence she had worn earlier beginning to fracture at the edges as she sensed the shift. Subtle but undeniable, something moving beneath the surface of what she could see, something she did not yet understand but could no longer ignore. Outside, through the tall glass panels, headlights appeared at the far end of the long driveway. Distant at first, blurred slightly by the rain, but growing brighter, more defined as they approached, a line of dark vehicles moving with quiet precision along the curve of the estate grounds. Their presence understated yet deliberate, and one of the staff members near the entrance glanced toward the window, their posture changing almost imperceptibly as recognition flickered across their face before they quickly composed themselves again. Olivia did not look toward the lights, not yet, but something in the air shifted as they drew closer, a subtle change in tension, in attention, as if the world beyond the glass had begun to press inward, altering the balance of the moment in ways no one inside had anticipated. She reached for the door, her fingers brushing against the cool metal handle, pausing just long enough to feel its weight, its solidity, and in that brief stillness, the entire room seemed to hold its breath again, suspended between what had been and what was about to unfold. The metal handle turned quietly in Olivia's hand, the soft click almost lost beneath the steady rhythm of rain. Yet inside the foyer it sounded louder than it should have, sharp enough to pull every eye toward her at once as the door eased open and a cool draft slipped in, carrying with it the scent of wet pavement and distant thunder. The air outside felt different, heavier but cleaner, as if it belonged to a world that had not witnessed what had just unfolded inside. And for a moment Olivia stood at that threshold, half in shadow, half in the muted gray light of the storm, her silhouette reflected faintly against the polished floor behind her. The line of headlights that had been distant moments ago now curved into the front drive with quiet precision. 3 black vehicles moving in unison, their engines low, controlled, not aggressive but undeniably intentional, and the gravel beneath their tires made a soft, deliberate crunch that echoed through the covered entryway. One of the staff near the door straightened instinctively, their posture shifting into something more formal, more alert, as recognition set in without being spoken, and even Vanessa's expression changed, just slightly, her eyes narrowing as she followed the movement outside, trying to place something that felt suddenly out of alignment with the scene she thought she controlled. Olivia stepped forward, just one step beyond the doorway, letting the cool air settle against her skin, the light drizzle brushing softly against her sleeves, and she closed her eyes for the briefest moment, not to escape, but to steady herself, to take ownership of the moment she was stepping into rather than the one she had just left. Behind her, Ethan moved again, quicker this time, his voice cutting through the space with more urgency than before. "Olivia, wait," he said, and there was something different in it now, something less composed, less certain, as if he had finally realized that whatever was happening was not unfolding according to his expectations. She paused, but she did not turn, her stillness not an invitation but a boundary, and that distinction hung between them, unspoken but clear. The first vehicle came to a smooth stop beneath the covered entrance, its headlights dimming as the engine quieted, followed closely by the others, their doors remaining closed for a fraction longer than expected, as if the timing itself mattered, as if every second was deliberate. The rain softened slightly, the sound shifting from a steady patter to a lighter tap against the roof above. And in that subtle quiet, the tension in the air sharpened instead of easing, drawing attention to every small movement, every breath, every glance. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan now, her voice low but edged with unease she could no longer fully conceal. "Who is that?" she asked, her earlier confidence thinning into something more cautious, more probing. And for once, Ethan did not have an immediate answer, his gaze fixed on the vehicles outside, his posture tightening in a way that suggested recognition not yet spoken aloud. Olivia's hand rested again against her abdomen. A quiet, grounding motion, her breathing steady, her shoulders relaxed in a way that did not match the tension around her, and that contrast alone seemed to deepen the unease inside the house. Then, as if responding to a silent cue, the rear door of the first vehicle opened slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, and a figure stepped out, tall, composed, his movements controlled and deliberate as his shoes met the wet pavement with a muted sound, followed by another from the second vehicle, and then a third from the last, each one carrying the same quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. They did not speak as they closed the doors behind them, did not rush forward or call out, but simply walked toward the entrance with measured steps, their presence alone shifting the balance of the space, drawing every gaze, altering every assumption. And for the first time since the moment Olivia had lowered to the floor, the control of the room no longer belonged to the people inside it. The three men moved through the rain without hesitation, their pace steady, unhurried, as if the storm itself adjusted around them rather than the other way around. Their coats darkened slightly by the drizzle, but their posture untouched by discomfort. And as they reached the covered entrance, the light from inside the house spilled across their faces just enough to reveal composure that did not need to prove itself. The first of them, tall with a quiet, grounded presence, stepped forward by half a pace, his eyes landing on Olivia immediately, not scanning, not questioning, simply recognizing, and something in his expression softened in a way that contrasted sharply with the tension behind her. The second man, broader in build, stood just to his right, his gaze briefly lifting toward the interior of the house, assessing without intrusion, while the third remained slightly behind, his attention fixed on Olivia with a calm intensity that carried more concern than alarm. None of them spoke at first, and that silence, unlike the one inside, did not feel cold or judgmental, but deliberate, respectful, as if they understood that the moment belonged to her before it belonged to anyone else. Olivia exhaled slowly, a breath she had been holding longer than she realized, and her shoulders eased by a fraction, not in relief, but in recognition, as though something long anticipated had finally arrived without needing to announce itself. Behind her, the shift inside the foyer became more visible, the staff now standing straighter, more attentive, their eyes no longer fixed on Olivia alone but drawn toward the presence at the door, and Vanessa's earlier certainty seemed to dissolve into something far less stable, her arms no longer comfortably crossed but held closer to her body, her weight shifting as she tried to recalibrate a situation that no longer followed her expectations. Ethan stepped forward into the entryway, his voice restrained but edged with a firmness he was trying to reclaim. "Can I help you?" he asked, directing the question outward while keeping one foot inside, as if unwilling to fully step into the space that now felt less certain, less controlled. The first man met his gaze briefly, not dismissive, not confrontational, simply acknowledging, before returning his attention to Olivia, and that subtle choice carried more weight than any direct response could have. Olivia turned slightly then, just enough for her profile to be visible from inside, her expression composed, her eyes steady. And in that small movement the distance between her and the house became unmistakable, no longer measured in steps, but in decision. The man in front of her removed his coat without a word, a smooth, practiced motion, and stepped closer just enough to drape it gently over her shoulders. The fabric warmed despite the rain, settling around her like something familiar, something intentional, and Olivia did not resist, did not question. She simply allowed it, her hand lifting briefly to hold it in place as her gaze met his fully for the first time. "You should not have had to stand out here," he said quietly, his voice low but steady, carrying a tone that was not anger, not yet, but something deeper, something controlled and measured, and Olivia's lips parted slightly as if to respond, but she did not, because the words were not necessary, not here. Inside, Vanessa let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh but carried none of its ease. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice sharper now, directed toward Ethan rather than the men outside, as if seeking reinforcement. "Whoever they are, this is still your house." And the statement hung in the air, thinner than it should have been, less convincing with every passing second. Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting again between Olivia and the three men, something tightening in his expression as recognition began to form, not complete, not fully understood, but enough to unsettle the certainty he had relied on moments before. The rain continued to fall, softer now, almost rhythmic, tapping against the roof above the entrance as the moment stretched, balanced between what had already been lost and what was about to be revealed. And in that space, the quiet authority of the men outside did not need to grow louder, because it was already changing everything. The rain softened into a steady whisper against the stone, a quiet rhythm that filled the space between breaths as the moment stretched longer than anyone inside the house expected. And for the first time since everything began, no one rushed to speak. No one tried to reclaim control, because something had shifted in a way that could not be reversed by words alone. Olivia stood beneath the coat now resting over her shoulders, its weight grounding, familiar in a way that reached beyond the present, and her hand remained lightly against her abdomen, her breathing even, her posture steady, as if the storm around her had settled somewhere deeper inside and found its balance. The three men remained close, not crowding her, not shielding her in an obvious way, but positioned with a quiet precision that made their presence undeniable, a formation that did not need explanation, only recognition. Inside the foyer, the light felt dimmer, though nothing had changed in the fixtures above. And Ethan's gaze lingered on Olivia longer than before, searching, measuring, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed he understood, and that uncertainty began to show in the slight tension of his jaw, in the way his shoulders no longer held the same effortless confidence. Vanessa shifted again, the faint echo of her heel against the marble breaking the stillness as she stepped forward, closer to Ethan now, her voice lowered but no longer steady. "You are letting this get out of hand," she said, her words directed at him but her eyes flicking back toward the entrance, toward the men who had not yet explained themselves, as if their silence itself was a challenge she did not know how to confront. Ethan did not answer her, not immediately, and that absence carried more weight than anything he could have said, because it marked the first moment he had not responded on instinct, the first pause that revealed hesitation. Outside, the first man finally spoke again, his voice calm, measured, carrying clearly despite its softness. "Olivia," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, not as a question, not as a claim, but as something acknowledged, something known, and she turned her head slightly toward him, just enough to meet his gaze fully. There was no urgency in his expression, no panic, only a steady assurance that did not need to be explained. And in that exchange, brief as it was, the tension in Olivia's shoulders eased by a fraction more, as if something long held had finally been set down. The second man glanced once more toward the interior of the house, his eyes passing over Ethan and Vanessa without lingering, not dismissive, not confrontational, simply aware, and then returned his focus outward, maintaining the quiet perimeter that had formed around Olivia. The third remained still, his presence almost silent, yet anchored, as if his role was not to speak, but to ensure that nothing disrupted what was unfolding. The sound of the rain shifted again, lighter now, tapping against the roof and the glass in a softer cadence, and somewhere beyond the driveway, the faint outline of a larger shape became visible through the gray sky, distant but unmistakable, its silhouette cutting through the clouds with slow, deliberate movement. Inside, one of the staff members near the window straightened sharply, their breath catching just enough to be noticed before they quickly composed themselves again. But the reaction did not go unseen, and Vanessa's eyes followed instinctively, narrowing as she tried to make sense of what she was witnessing. Ethan turned his head slightly, his gaze drawn toward the same direction, and for the first time, something close to recognition settled into his expression, not fully formed, but enough to unsettle the foundation of certainty he had held moments before. Olivia did not look toward the sky, not yet, because she did not need to, and that quiet confidence, that absence of curiosity, only deepened the shift that had already begun, a silent indication that whatever was approaching was not unexpected to her. And as the low hum of distant engines began to blend with the fading rain, the balance of power that had once belonged to the house behind her moved further, undeniably, into the space she now occupied. The low hum that had lingered in the distance deepened into something unmistakable, a controlled vibration in the air that seemed to press gently against the glass walls. And within seconds the outline in the sky sharpened, descending through the gray clouds with slow precision until the full shape of a private jet came into view, its polished body catching what little light remained and reflecting it in muted silver streaks across the storm-dark sky. The sound was not overwhelming, not chaotic, but powerful in a way that did not need to prove itself, and as it lowered toward a cleared section beyond the estate grounds, every person inside the foyer felt it before they fully processed what they were seeing. Vanessa's breath caught, barely audible, but enough to break the fragile composure she had been trying to maintain, her eyes widening as the reality of the moment began to form in ways she could not immediately dismiss. While Ethan stepped forward instinctively now, no longer holding himself at a distance, his gaze locked onto the aircraft as it settled with deliberate control onto the wet tarmac beyond the property line. The staff near the windows shifted again, their attention no longer hidden, their posture now openly alert, as if something far beyond routine protocol had just entered their field of awareness. Outside, the three men did not turn toward the jet immediately, their focus remaining on Olivia, as if its arrival was expected, already accounted for, part of a sequence that did not require their attention to confirm. Olivia herself did not look back either, her gaze steady ahead, her breathing calm, her hands still resting lightly against her abdomen. And that stillness in the presence of something so visibly significant only deepened the contrast between her and everyone else in the scene. The jet's engines softened as it came to a complete stop, the final hum tapering into a quiet that felt heavier than the noise before it. And for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold in that silence, suspended between recognition and understanding. Then, with mechanical precision, the aircraft door opened, a narrow line at first, then wider, and a set of stairs extended downward, unfolding slowly until they touched the ground. With a muted, controlled motion, inside the house, no one spoke now, not even Vanessa, whose earlier confidence had faded into something closer to disbelief. Her arms no longer crossed, her posture no longer certain, as she watched the scene outside with a growing awareness that whatever narrative she had believed she controlled was no longer hers. Ethan's expression tightened further, recognition now fully present, though unspoken, his mind catching up to what his instincts had already begun to warn him about, and for the first time, the certainty that had defined him seemed to falter under the weight of what he was witnessing. The first figure appeared at the top of the stairs, stepping into view with the same composed authority as the men already standing at the entrance, followed by another presence behind him, the movement unhurried, deliberate, each step measured as they descended toward the ground. The rain had nearly stopped now, reduced to a faint mist that clung to the air, and in that softened light, the scene felt almost unreal, as if time itself had slowed to allow every detail to settle into place. Olivia finally lifted her gaze slightly, not fully turning, but enough to acknowledge what had arrived. And there was no surprise in her expression, no hesitation, only a quiet certainty that aligned perfectly with the presence surrounding her. Behind her, the house stood unchanged in structure but entirely altered in meaning, its walls no longer defining the moment, but merely observing it, as the true center of gravity shifted outward, toward the open space where the jet now rested and where the truth, long unseen, was beginning to take form. The figure descending the aircraft stairs did not rush, each step placed with quiet certainty, his posture upright, composed, his presence alone enough to shift the weight of the moment even further, and as his shoes touched the wet ground, The three men already standing near Olivia adjusted subtly, not stepping forward, not bowing, but aligning in a way that made their relationship unmistakable, without a single word being spoken. The second figure followed just behind, his expression equally controlled, his gaze sweeping once across the estate before settling on Olivia with something more personal, something that carried history rather than curiosity. Together, they moved forward across the damp pavement, the distance between the aircraft and the entrance closing slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had stretched to accommodate their arrival. Inside the house, the silence deepened into something heavier, more difficult to ignore, and Ethan took another step forward, this time fully crossing the threshold of the doorway, his voice lower now, more cautious. "Olivia," he said again. But this time it was not a command, not even a suggestion. It was something closer to uncertainty, as if he were reaching for a connection that no longer responded. Olivia did not turn immediately, her attention drawn forward as the two men from the aircraft approached, and when they reached the edge of the covered entrance, the first of them stopped just short of her, his eyes softening in a way that contrasted sharply with the controlled authority he carried moments before. "You should have called," he said quietly, his voice steady but edged with something protective, something restrained, and Olivia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not into relief, but into acknowledgement, as if she had expected those words but chosen a different path anyway. "I needed to see it for myself," she replied, her tone calm, unbroken, and that answer seemed to settle something unspoken between them, something that did not need further explanation. The man inclined his head slightly, accepting her response without challenge, and for a brief moment, the world narrowed to that exchange alone, everything else fading into the background. Behind her, Vanessa's composure fractured completely, her voice sharper now, edged with disbelief. "What is this?" she demanded, her gaze moving rapidly between the men, the aircraft, and Olivia, as if searching for something she could still control, something she could still dismiss, but finding none. Ethan remained silent, his expression no longer guarded but openly unsettled, recognition now fully present in his eyes, the pieces aligning in a way that made the truth unavoidable. The second man from the aircraft stepped slightly to the side, his attention shifting briefly toward Ethan, not confrontational, not aggressive, but direct enough to acknowledge his presence without granting him authority. And then he spoke, his voice measured, clear. "You must be Ethan Blake," he said, not as a question, but as a statement, and the way he said it carried neither respect nor disrespect, only fact. Ethan nodded slowly, his composure tightening as he tried to reclaim ground that was no longer his. "And you are?" he asked, though the answer had already begun to form in his mind. The man did not respond immediately, his gaze returning to Olivia instead, and in that choice alone, the hierarchy of the moment became unmistakable. Olivia finally turned then, fully, her eyes meeting Ethan's for the first time since she stepped outside, and there was no anger in her expression, no accusation, only clarity, the kind that leaves no room for negotiation. "This is my family," she said simply, her voice steady, her words carrying more weight than anything spoken before, and the silence that followed was not empty, but final, settling over the scene like a truth that could no longer be undone. The words settled into the space like something irreversible, not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that did not invite challenge, and for a moment no one moved, as if the entire scene had paused to absorb what had just been said. Ethan stood at the threshold, his posture no longer anchored in certainty, his expression caught between disbelief and realization, and for the first time since Olivia had stepped into his life, he saw her without assumption, without the quiet narrative he had built around her, and what replaced it was something far more difficult to face. Vanessa let out a small, disjointed breath, the sound barely controlled, her gaze shifting rapidly as if searching for a flaw in what she had just heard, something she could still dismiss, something she could still reduce, but there was nothing left to diminish, nothing left to reframe, and the silence answered her more clearly than any argument could. The men beside Olivia did not step forward, did not assert themselves further, because they did not need to. Their presence alone already reshaping the moment, already establishing a boundary that no one inside the house could cross without invitation. Olivia stood between both worlds, the house behind her, the storm-washed air ahead, and for a brief second, the only sound was the faint drip of rain from the edge of the roof, tapping softly against the stone below. Ethan took a step closer, just one, careful, as if approaching something fragile, something he did not fully understand anymore, his voice lower now, stripped of the authority it once carried. "Olivia, I did not know," he said, the words measured but incomplete, because even as he spoke them, he seemed to realize that they did not change anything, that knowledge now arrived too late to hold value. Olivia met his gaze, steady, unshaken, and there was no anger in her eyes, no attempt to make him feel what she had felt, only a quiet distance that spoke more clearly than emotion ever could. "You did not ask," she replied, her voice calm, even, and the simplicity of the truth landed heavier than accusation, because it left no space for defense, no room for explanation. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, the weight of that answer settling in as he searched for something more to say, but the moment offered him nothing, no opening, no path backward. Behind him, Vanessa stepped back almost unconsciously, the confidence that had defined her earlier completely gone now, replaced by a stillness that bordered on uncertainty, as if the ground beneath her had shifted without warning and she no longer trusted where she stood. One of the men beside Olivia moved then, subtle, but decisive, opening the rear door of the nearest vehicle, his motion smooth, unspoken, an invitation that required no explanation. Olivia glanced once toward the car, then back toward the house, not lingering, not reconsidering, simply acknowledging the space she was leaving behind, and in that brief moment, the distance between her and everything inside became absolute. She adjusted the coat around her shoulders, her hand resting once more against her abdomen, and took a step forward, her movement calm, assured, each step carrying her further from the place that had failed to hold her. Ethan did not follow, did not call out again, because something in the way she moved made it clear that this was not a moment that could be interrupted, not a decision that could be undone. The door of the vehicle remained open, waiting, and as Olivia reached it, one of the men placed a steady hand against the frame, ensuring the space was clear, his gesture quiet, respectful, protective without drawing attention to itself. She paused just long enough to take a final breath, the cool air filling her lungs, the last trace of rain settling against her skin, and then she stepped inside, the interior light casting a soft glow around her before the door closed with a muted, final sound. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped, leaving only the faint scent of wet stone and the quiet hum of engines idling, and through the tinted glass, Ethan's reflection remained visible for a moment, standing alone at the entrance, no longer framed by power, only by distance. The vehicles began to move, slow at first, then steady as they followed the curve of the driveway away from the house, their taillights fading into the dim evening light, and inside, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to say, only the quiet understanding that what had just passed was not an ending shaped by noise or confrontation, but by something far more lasting, a silence that carried the weight of consequence and the clarity of truth.